This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Start your day with Quaker Protein Instant Oatmeal. The instant oatmeal ready to help you tackle whatever your day brings. Like wrangling your toddler into their car seat. That was fun. Coaching your 6th graders soccer team. Go girls! And carrying all the groceries in one trip. Whew. Try Quaker Protein Instant Oatmeal, granola, and bars. Great taste and a good source of protein. Quaker, bring out the good.
Hello there, Stanley Carr here. You know, I love collecting music and sports memorabilia. Want to know where you can find some? I'll tell you. Go to oldglory.com. This website features one-of-a-kind apparel from your favorite sports teams and musical artists. And I can help you get 15% off of all items. Use the code WWH135. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positive vibes here on the show, and with me right now, I've got a very special guest. He has worked for WCW as well as numerous independent promotions. I am pleased to welcome Robbie Idol. Welcome to Wrestling with Heart.
Thank you very much, Stanley. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. So let's get into this. So were you always a big wrestling fan growing up?
Yes. So when we moved to Florida, so I moved to Florida in 1971. I, like every other kid, played baseball and football, in school. My dad hated sports, but the only sport my dad liked was professional wrestling. So when we moved down here, we started watching it. It was on every Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. So he would watch it. So that was like the only thing my father and I had in common. And so, you got to, like, I grew up watching the Jack and Jerry Briscoe, Dusty Rhodes, the Funks, Mike Graham, Eddie Graham, all those, like, the greats from that era. So I took an interest in it. And of course, like, when you'd have so we lived in Sarasota for a year and a half and then moved to Venice in 72. But Robarts Arena was in Sarasota. So anytime there was, like, big matches, say like Dusty versus the Funks or he was a big Jack and Jerry Briscoe fan. So you could always, like, you'd see the big matches that came to Robarts. You would always go, hey, can we go? Can we go? And, most of the time we would wind up going. So I always had an interest in it. Just because I watched it as a kid. But my biggest things growing up, like, I always thought I was going to play pro baseball.
So you're always big into athletics, even as a youngster, you're always big into sports.
Yes. Yeah. So I played, like I said, in school, played baseball and football, kind of sat out football my junior and senior year just because I was, like, injury prone. And I figured I didn't think I had a shot, like, to go play college football or NFL. And I thought I just loved baseball more than all the other sports.
So I would think as a baseball player, you're learning so much about hand-eye coordination. Talk to me about some of the other lessons you may have learned during your time playing baseball that kind of helped propel you to have such a career in professional wrestling.
My work ethic. So, I had buddies that I played sports with, baseball and football, that were very athletic, and they were head and shoulders above me. So like they were just natural athletes. I had to work at it. So my work ethic, like he's my best friend still, he was one of my very first friends when I moved to Venice in 72, and we're still friends to this day. So like 53 years. He just was that natural talented athlete. So he didn't have to practice. And I guess I was always envious of him. And so I just had that work ethic that it's funny. We've talked about it like, in past, and he always goes, I wish I had your work ethic. And I go, I wish I had your talent. So, I learned a work ethic just to work harder than anybody else on, to be the first one on the field and last one off the field.
Yeah, definitely having that work ethic definitely helps build confidence and helps you kind of like practice, with practicing, and just helps you just kind of like instill like, hey, it builds a foundation. Like if I'm going to do this and put my efforts into this, I can make it anywhere and be successful. If I can do anything and put my mind to it, I know I can go far in whatever industry you decide to want to pursue. So at what age did you go, okay, you know what? I want to try this wrestling thing, give this a shot. How do I get started? How do I look for a school?
Here, what's funny about it is so watching it, the way it came about is kind of odd. I'm trying to think. So I wound up playing real briefly for the Dunedin Blue Jays, and I got released. So when I got released, you got to remember, I was back before the internet era. So I had gotten released in 80. So I had also had gotten a couple offers to play sports. So a couple of my coaches had put in good words, even though I didn't, like I said, my senior year play football. One of my coaches put in a real good word for me to a couple schools that had kind of looked at me. So the two big, it was, where I had a chance to go to school was I could have went back home. I was originally from Buffalo. So I could have went to UB. They offered me a scholarship to come play baseball and football. And the other was here in Florida, was Florida A&M. So when I got released, I thought, well, maybe I can go back to school and I'll just go play football. I coming out at high school and stuff, I wasn't that big kid. I was 175 pounds. So I thought, well, I don't really know my family that well. I don't want to deal with the snow in Buffalo and everything. I'll take my shot at Florida A&M. So I had talked to the coach, and the coach at that time was Rudy Hubbard. And I had spoke to him on the phone, and when I played football, I was a safety. And I told him I didn't want to be a safety anymore. I said, and he goes, what position you want to play, son? And I go, I want to be a fullback. And he goes, how much you weigh? And I lied. I told him I'm 185 pounds. And he goes, son, when my fullbacks are 215. And when you come to school, if you're not 215, you're going to be a safety. And I went, I'll be 215, coach. And so I thought, okay, you go lift weights. I didn't realize you had to eat like a horse on top of it to gain weight and stuff. So I started lifting weights, and I got to 185 pounds and couldn't gain any more weight. But in that time, it was funny because I started gravitating to the bodybuilders and power lifters, and they kind of, took me in and took me under the wing and stuff. So I, started lifting with them. They, explained to me, yes, you got to eat on top of it to get bigger. And so I was probably 21, I think at the time, one of my friends that I hung with, his dad, Mr. Richmond, looked at me one day and goes, you got that look of a professional wrestler. You should try to get into professional wrestling. Well, the gym I was working out at was the Venice Racquetball Fitness Center. So it was a gym, racquetball court and stuff. Well, the racquetball pro was the ring announcer for Florida Championship Wrestling. And so I had went up to Jay and I asked him, I said, hey, Jay, how do I go about trying to get into professional wrestling? And Jay looked at me and he goes, you're not big enough. I think I weighed at the time like 198 pounds. He goes, you're not big enough. And I don't know that you have the toughness to get there. I kind of, like I said, before the internet and stuff. So I didn't know that there was a school in Tampa, and it never dawned on me that there was a wrestling school. So in Tampa, though, there was, and it was the great Malenko. So he had a school, but I didn't know it. So I kind of let it go. And I want to say a few years went by and still I was watching wrestling. We were going, my training partner that I was training with at the time, we were both competing in bodybuilding and powerlifting a little bit. He had qualified for Mr. America. And so we were trying to keep the workouts together, so I could help him train for Mr. America. So we looked for a contest, and the closest that was there was Mr. Florida. So I started preparing for Mr. Florida. He was training for Mr. America, and he knew the dieting and everything. So we went into the bulk up phase, and I trained really heavy. I was eating 8,000 calories a day. So I blew up to 250. And one day we were in the gym training, and I looked at my buddy and I go, hey, it's those two guys from Florida Championship Wrestling. So Rick Ryder and Bob Cook were training in our gym, and I, saw them, and Rick looked at me and I looked at Rick, and we kind of nodded at each other. And Rick walked over and he looked at me and Bob and said, when are you guys going to learn how to wrestle? Well, Bob walked away, and I looked at Rick and I go, what do I have to do? And he goes, you show me how to lift weights and I'll show you how to wrestle. And I'm like, when do we start? And that's how I got into professional wrestling. Rick started training me one-on-one.
Professional wrestling, it's a very hard business, very tough, very rigorous schedule that a lot of the men and women in the business, that want to do professional wrestling, you have to endure such a grueling lifestyle. And so for your experiences, I want to talk about the training process. Mm-hmm. What was it like? Tell me about the feeling it was being able to step into the ring for the first time, and pieces of advice, words of wisdom that you got from your trainers when pursuing this career in professional wrestling.
So I've actually stepped in the ring, been training. So we'll start from this first one. The first time watching it all the time, I thought I could do it. I didn't, because I had an athletic background. But it was totally different than what I thought it would be. It was a very learning process. And my path to where I got is so different. Like people have said, have gone to wrestling schools. So the training, I was trained one-on-one. Like I said, Rick Ryder trained me. So my training is totally different than, say, go to a wrestling school. So I was trained one-on-one. So, he took me through, but say in a wrestling school, and down the road I did, he didn't teach me to roll and stuff like that. So you never did roll warm-ups and stuff. Your warm-ups were so totally different. You stretched out, you got into the ring, he'd show you how to run the ropes, stuff like that. So it was totally different. And then you would kind of go, you'd go over chain wrestling and stuff like that, where, like I said, it was totally different my first go around. So I broke in 85. And what was funny was we had the first week, Rick started training me. And so after the first week, Rick was wrestling for Florida Championship Wrestling and the Independent Circle. So there was one of the indies he was working for. I don't remember the name. I can tell you that I remember the guy that ran it was John Davenport. And Rick was like, hey, I'm training this big guy. I got this big guy I'm training. So the second week that Rick was training me, he goes, hey, I'm going to take you to Mulberry and I'm going to introduce you to John Davenport. He's the guy that's running the indies. He wants to meet you. So I went and I met John on a Sunday, and he looked at me and he goes, bring your gear next week. You're going to wrestle. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not ready to wrestle. I go, I've only been training like 2 weeks. And he goes, you'll be fine. I'm going to put you with Rick. And I'm like, no, I'm still learning. I have no idea. And he said, you'll be fine. And so, I wound up, I was excited. I was nervous, because I still was learning and I knew I had a long way to go. And so I wound up wrestling. And I think the saving grace was whoever filmed that match with Rick and I was worse than the match was, because they missed so much. You would see the ground, you'd see the sky, but it was a learning experience. And so I kind of learned on the fly. I trained every chance I got with Rick, and I was wrestling on Sundays with people, and it started to come. But it was a process. It was totally different than, say, a lot of people that have broken into wrestling.
Well, you get that experience, that one-on-one experience. You learn. It's very intimate. You can have that more attention to be able to focus on things that you're struggling with and need things that you want to work on. Have that time to be able to fix those things, get all the bells and whistles in order. You talked about work ethic and the importance of having one earlier on. When things got hard for you, what were some things that kind of motivated you to keep on going?
Just because I wanted to make it. And this is going to sound, the word I'm trying to look for, but in high school, I wasn't a popular kid. I wanted to be famous, and it didn't bother me. I had like my friends that I hung out with and everything. As you went through, how like the popular kids and stuff, and my buddies that I hung out would go, God, I wish we were popular. And I'd look at them and go, why? And they go, oh, so we could get invited to parties and stuff like that. And I didn't say anything to them, but in my head, it was like, you guys are missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is, this is high school. We're talking down the road, as we get older. And I thought, I will be famous, because like I said, I thought I'd play pro ball and I thought I'd have this great career. So I was looking at a bigger picture. And so my motivation was, I wanted to be the next Ric Flair. So, when things got hard, I never walked away from anything when things got hard. So the funniest thing was, for me, the hardest part in wrestling was to learn how to take a bump. I just could not take it. And at one point it came that Rick and he was trying to, take the bump in there. We were running spots and take the bump in. They were horrible. And I remember Rick, screaming and swearing at me. And on the way home, I just thought, we're kind of walking on thin ice. So when I got home, my girlfriend at the time, I showed her, I go, you're going to hit me with a clothesline. I took the mattress and threw it on the floor. I had her hit me with a clothesline, I don't know, 10 to 20 times. And I had figured, I said, make sure you hit me in the chest. And I knew there were times I had pissed her off, so I was hoping she didn't hit me in the face. But she'd hit me in the chest, and you'd start to go. And about the third one, I think, she looked and she goes, you did it. You finally did it. And we just kept on going because I wanted to make sure I had it. So we probably did it 10, 20 times.
Yeah, repetition, I mean, that helps so much. And it really goes to show you, you work at it, you can make it far. And you really, have to discipline yourself. to be able to get to that level. So you make your debut in the wrestling scene. Talk to me about your first match. Were you nervous? Were you scared? Did you feel confident?
Yeah, well, I mean, here's what the funny part was. Rick, like I said, I had been wrestling in the indies. Rick would always look at me and he goes, "When I think you're ready, I will put in a word for you at Florida Championship Wrestling, and I'll get you a tryout." So it was like a few days before my 25th birthday, and Rick goes, "Hey, bring your stuff. I'll take you to TV. You can, I'll get you in. You'll sit in the audience, and then we'll go work out after I do TV taping. We'll go and we'll work out and everything." And I said, "Okay." So we got probably a couple blocks away from the sportatorium, and Rick looked at me and goes, "Make sure you bring your bags with you. Happy birthday. I got you a tryout, and don't F this up." So now he didn't tell me on the way up. So now I was nervous. I was scared to death, but it was funny because you had a lot of emotions going through you. So when you walked and you were in the dressing room, here you are with people you watched as a kid. So you're in the locker room with Mike Graham, Steve Kern, Dusty Rhodes, Kevin Sullivan, all these, the Florida legends and everything. And you're like, wow, this is it's cool, but you're also nervous. And so I had no idea, how any of this stuff worked the first time through. So then when they put the sheet up, Rick walked over and he goes, "It's me and you against the Cuban Assassins." So I got to work with Ricky Santana and Dave Sierra, and which was very good because they took care of me. They were wonderful to work with. You were nervous until that first move. And once you got the first move out, it was fine. Everything, you just kind of settled in. You didn't notice the crowd or anything. You just did what you were supposed to do.
Yeah, once you are able to get over that hump and you're able to put a few matches together, start having a few under your belt, you start developing that sense of confidence that, like, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. And so eventually you get an offer to join WCW. What year exactly did you get that call?
Well, here's how that went. I, at the time, was wrestling for Florida Championship Wrestling. They had started back up again. So remember when they were buying out all the territories and everything? Mm-hmm. So Crockett came in, took the big names from Florida Championship Wrestling, and so everything shut down. So I was kind of like, now what? But I was still wrestling on the indie scene. So then Mike Graham and Steve Kern started Florida Championship Wrestling up again. And they started using all of us that WCW didn't use. So I want to say it was 87, 88. I wound up somehow getting Kevin Sullivan's number. And I wound up calling Kevin and talking to him because years ago, I had met Kevin and I had worked out with him. And at the time I got to work out with him, I wanted to get into wrestling, but I didn't say anything to Kevin because I didn't want him to think, okay, the reason I'm working out with you is I want something from you. So I just, I got to lift with Kevin like back in the day a few times, and I left it at that. I never really asked him that. And then when I got into Florida Championship Wrestling, him and Mike were the two biggest reasons why I got into Florida Championship Wrestling. From my tryout, they kept me and everything. They saw something they liked. So it was those two guys. Then I wound up, I want to say like late 87, early 88, I called Kevin and asked him, and he said, "I'll bring you and Rick up for a tryout. Let's see how you do, and we'll go from there." So we wound up going to Atlanta and did TV. And again, a lucky break for us, now you're with the big stars again. The fortunate thing for Rick and I, though, the first TV match, we worked the New Breed. Chris Champion and Sean Royal had worked them in Florida. So it was, you're still nervous. Every match you were, beginning of the match, you were nervous. But once you got settled in that first move and everything, you settled in. So Rick and I wound up doing good, and Kevin started bringing us back for TV. And then after a while, they started putting us on house shows and using us on a regular basis.
So you get on national television, get that exposure, you rub shoulders with all these people in the industry. I'd imagine you've got some butterflies.
Yes. I mean, and like I said, every match you were nervous till that first move, and then you were good. So, and I think part of it, like when I was at Florida Championship Wrestling before they bought the territories, the neat part was, and I mean, you're going back, so we're going to say, 86, maybe 87, the Great American Bashes. I got to be part of a lot of the beginning ones. So I was probably part of 4 or 5 of them. That was before, they got to pay-per-view and stuff. So I always, you look back and you're so thankful for that, going, how cool is this little skinny kid, that people kind of thought, and now you get to be in the Great American Bash, and you were part of the beginning of that, so you got to work people that, went on to become big names.
Who would you say have been some of your favorite opponents that you've gotten to be in the ring with?
Can I use some of my indie guys too?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've worked, Kevin was always fun to work with, Kevin Sullivan. I got to work with Mick Foley. He was fun. I got to work with The Undertaker before he was The Undertaker. He was easy. The Barbarian and the Warlord, they were, great guys to work with. Most of the guys that that I've done TV with, Arn Anderson, those guys were great. I got to work with Dory Funk Jr. So I can say I worked with a legend. I also got to work with Jerry Lawler. So that was, a blast to say, that I got to work with. I was nervous with Lawler and Funk. I was nervous because those were guys that you had seen as a kid, and you knew they were true legends. On the indie scene, of course, Rick, I got to work with Rick Ryder. I worked with, that was one of my favorites. Rick was probably my all-time favorite that I worked with because he trained me. And then years later, when I came back in 98, I got to work with TNT Mahoney, Billy Lindsay. I got to work with, now everybody knows him as Roderick Strong. So I worked with him as a kid. He was a kid. He was like 15 years old. That was Billy's son. And I got to work with Chris. And he was, at that age, he was super. You knew he was destined for, to do things. Who else did I get to work with? I worked Mark Merrow's very first match with him. And we did a brief run in the indie circuit, and he was easy to work with. But my all-time favorites, like I said, a lot of the guys in WCW that, I worked with, they were all easy, professional and everything. But like my all-time favorites were like Rick, TNT, Billy Lindsay, Chris, just because you got to showcase your talents and everything like that. And it was just, you were close with those guys. So, it just, and another one, and believe it or not, I'm still wrestling still. He's like my nephew because I've known him since he was a baby. Bob Cook's son, Robbie Cook. And Robbie is one of my favorites to work with. And I actually have a match coming up in May 9th with Robbie. So I have worked Robbie like 4 or 5 times.
Now, you were in WCW for quite a while, and then something had happened to you, very serious. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Oh, sure. So started because I would wrestling for WCW, and still like on the weekends I would wrestle for the independent circuit. So on a Saturday I was supposed to work for Rick, and he had an indie show, and I woke up that morning and it was like, take your worst being drunk.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man, an 8-episode series, now streaming on Disney+.
A superhero remake, not exactly what we'd expect from an Oscar-winning director.
Action! Simon Williams, audition for Wonder Man.
I'm gonna need you to sign this, assuming you don't have superpowers.
I'll never work again if anyone found out.
My lips are sealed.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man. All 8 episodes now streaming, only on Disney+.
And take it, intensify it by 10 times. The room just spun and everything. I was sick and everything. So we wound up going to the emergency room, and they said I was dehydrated. And so I went back home. They filled, I was in the hospital. I was at the emergency room probably 4 or 5 hours, and they filled me like 2 bags of fluids and stuff. Went back home and just, went back. I passed out and everything. So missed the show. I didn't even think of to call Rick and say, hey, I'm not going to be there. And so Sunday, the same thing wound up happening. So did the same thing, had the same doctor. And what was funny, the same thing, he said, you're dehydrated. He goes, but I think you have vertigo. And they gave me some medicine for it. They called it in and that. So I started taking it. But the symptoms that I had was I had blurred vision. I lost feeling in my hands, some slurred speech. And kind of when you walked, you kind of veered. So people kind of thought, well, is he drinking or something like that? And so I'm trying to, I had that and I kind of try to hide it. I was trying to hide it because it would come and go. And I think I hid it for a couple months. And then finally I said, something's not right. And I think and partly because my wife knew, like I went to pull something out of the fridge and I dropped it. And so they knew it. So we wound up going to the doctors, and I wound up going to a neurologist, and he scheduled an MRI. So it was on a Friday, and we did the MRI. So that Saturday we wound up going out with friends. So this was 92. So about that time that Lyle Ozado had, got diagnosed and stuff. And at dinner, I was joking around with my friends and my wife and going, watch, they're going to tell me I have what Lyle Ozado has. And, they were like, don't say that. Don't say that. And so Monday came, I knew the doctor's office manager. I had known her just, from being out and everything. And it got to be like 10 o'clock. And I'm like, I haven't heard from the doctor. And I thought it was kind of strange. I'm thinking, wow, you would have called me and let me know results. So what had happened is I called them. I got her and she said, he wants to see you and your wife this afternoon. Now it said, kind of like I think I jinxed myself. The rest of the day till we got to the doctors, I was like, wonder how, what's he going to tell me? Is he going to tell me you have X amount of time or whatever? And so when we got there in the afternoon, when we got into the office, I was a nervous wreck that whole day and everything. And as we sat, he looked and he goes, you have MS. Kind of was like a big weight off my shoulder. I mean, I had heard of it, but I had no idea what it was. And I looked at him and I said, can you fix it? And he goes, there's no cure for it. And so I, don't really remember what went through my head at that time and stuff. And the funny part on it, as we were leaving, he held my wife back and he was talking to her. So on the way home, she had this real look of concern on her face and everything. And I'm looking at her and I go, what's the matter? And she wouldn't tell me. And I said, it'll be okay. Everything will be okay. And years later, I found out that the doctor, when he had held her back, he looked and he told her, he goes, get ready. He'll be in a wheelchair in 6 months. So, but she didn't, I didn't find that out till years later. So,
Yeah, I mean, that is hard. You know, you're pursuing your dream, you want to be in the industry, you're working on big time television, getting to work so many of the big names, and then this happens, and it's like, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And the fact that you have been resilient and have been able to pursue your dream still to this day and keep going, I mean, that's a testament to your work ethic.
well, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, it was so like the first couple years, within shortly after that, came out with like some experimental drugs. And of course, I was very fortunate. The two neurologists I have, the first one I had was Dr. Weirich, rest in peace. I mean, he was a great man. He did everything in his powers for whatever reason. Like I said, both these neurologists, I had Dr. Weirich and the one I have now, Dr. Nagrowski, they are very special to me. They look, like they have gone out of their way for me. They have just done everything and stuff. And Dr. Weirich, he got me on the experimental drugs and everything. And what was funny was, so the first couple years I kind of laid low, take it easy. I owned my own business and I trained. So I still was lifting and everything. So was lifting. At the time I didn't own my business. I take that back. I went back to a company that I had worked with when I got released from the Blue Jays. And so it was fortunate for me. He was looking for somebody and I needed a job. So I started working with him. And then a few years later, I wound up buying him out because he wanted out and I wanted him out. So I wound up taking over the business. And so, I just kind of lifted weights and ran the business and kind of, rest, just kind of took it easy. And after a couple of years, I'm like, this isn't me. I just not that type, not that guy. And I happened to be in the grocery store one day and I ran into a guy I knew and he was like, hey, I'm playing in a men's baseball league. You interested in playing? Would you be interested? And I'm like, sure. Where is it and stuff? And he gave me the information and stuff. So I wound up starting to play in a men's baseball league. And it was funny because you got going, you started practicing and everything during the week and stuff, and you were playing games. And then some of the guys were playing, there were guys I played ball with that were playing like 5 nights a week. And they were like, hey, are you interested? So I was playing on a Sunday. They went, are you interested in going to Fort Myers and playing? There's a league down in Fort Myers. We can get you in. I'll put you on our team. And I said, sure. So for like 3-4 years, I wound up, playing Saturday and Sunday, catching 2 games. And, so I caught 4 games in 2 days on the weekends for these guys. And then we would go to tournaments and stuff. And I started playing in tournaments and stuff like that. And what was funny was, I played till, I guess, 97, I think. And I also coached. So I wound up coaching like in the Babe Ruth League and coached AAU. So I was coaching all my buddies' kids. And then after them, when they got into high school and stuff, there were probably like 5-6 kids that you were very, very close with. And what was funny, they knew I wrestled because they would go when, the shows were here and stuff, and they would come see you and everything. So I want to say 98, I was, hanging out at one of their games and stuff. And one of the kids that I was close with, he goes, Coach, you ever see ECW? And I'm like, ECW, what? I'm like, what is ECW? And he goes, oh, you got to watch it, Coach. It's great. And so I'm looking it up and I'm like, and his name was Mason and we called him Bam Bam. And when I saw him, I'm like, what are you doing up at 2:00 in the morning watching this stuff? Oh, it's great, Coach. You gotta watch it. So I had watched it and it was funny because, there were guys I had worked with in there. So I had worked with Mike Awesome, Scotty, the Raven, and some other guys. And I watched and I saw a match with Mike Awesome and Tanaka. And my wife happened to be walking through and awesome, threw Tanaka over his, over the guard, over the ropes, through a table to the guardrail. And my wife looked at me and she goes, "Aren't you glad you're not there?" And I went, "No, this is great." And she had this look on her face like, "Oh no." And, wheels started turning and I'm thinking, wow, I wonder. And, I was like, I wonder if I could come back and try to get a shot with ECW. And so I started talking to Rick again. By that time, everybody, I think the only one out of us that was still wrestling, but not on a full-time basis, was just part-time, was Bob Cook. And I was talking to Rick and wound up talking him into doing a benefit match. Because I had, like I said, the kids I had coached, they were playing baseball and football, and they were playing football, and they were doing something. And I was talking to Rick, and I said, "Rick, let's put together a card, take all the money. There's guys from, our high school, they're doing like a fundraiser to do something for the football team." I said, we'll donate all the money to the football team. Let's do this. I know you've been out, I've been out, but I want to come back. It'll be your retirement match. And Rick agreed to it. And so we wound up, putting together a card and everything and doing a match for it. And we took all the money and gave it to the high school, to donate for the football team.
That's amazing. Being able to come back especially for a really important cause. Talk to me more about being able to be a coach for these kids, because you're out there, you're making a difference to them, and they're being inspired to do well, not only in the sport of baseball, but do well in the world.
Well, like I said, there was probably the kids I coached were great, but I had like I said, like about 6 kids that I got to be very, very close with. They were like the sons you never had. And to this day, they still talk to me. They'll, I'll get texts on my birthday, "Hey, happy birthday, coach," and stuff. My biggest lessons to them was to work hard, and just anything you do, I passed on what my mom taught me, was be the best at it. No matter what you do your best, try to be the best. And, I'll get stuff from them that they're like, "Hey, coach, I appreciate this, thanks, coach." And it's kind of cool still having them call you coach and stuff. A few of the kids I got to be very, very close with. I won't say anything in case somebody sees it. I don't want to cause problems, but he definitely was the son I never had. And it's funny to this day, when we introduce each other, if we're around, this is my illegitimate son, and he'll go, "This is my illegitimate father." And we got to, and the thing that makes that very special is we'll talk. We don't talk as much because, he's got some kids, and he went on, and I'll tell you a funny story about it. But he told me, he goes, "You were more of a father to me than my own father was." And that meant a lot. So that, knowing that you kind of did that. And it's funny at times when we talked, he just a real good athlete. He played basketball and baseball. And his big thing was he wanted to play, if he had his choice, he wanted to be in the NBA. So it was funny. So I want to say his junior year, maybe going into his senior year, I looked at him and we would talk, and I would say, "I love you like my own kid. And so I'm telling you this from my perspective. You're a better baseball player than you are a basketball player." I said, "You have 2 strikes against you for basketball. One is Venice. It's not a basketball school." I go, "Play both. I'm not telling you not to play basketball." I said, "But you definitely will get a scholarship to play baseball because you're that good. And I said, no matter who comes to knock on your door for a scholarship, I go, even if it's Suck You State and they have a basketball team and they want you, I go, you go, I will come to your school, but I want to play basketball too. And I said, you can do that. And, and I get it because, as a kid, we all do, we think we know it. And it's funny when I do talk to him at times to this day, he goes, I should have listened to you. Because he wound up going to school, tried out for basketball. He got cut because he didn't have a scholarship. So he tried to walk on and he wound up getting cut. But he's still successful. He's a basketball coach. He's an athletic director. So he went on to still do really well, which is great. And I always told him, I said, you didn't do anything different than the rest. And I go, as a kid, when I played ball, I go, my buddy's dad played minor league ball for the Yankees. I could play anywhere on the field. The two positions I really couldn't play was second and short, that I wasn't that good, but I could play any of the other positions. But all through school, I was a pitcher and an outfielder. And my buddy's dad would go, you'll have a shot at you'll make it at least maybe to the minors. Stay in the outfield. You're a great defensive outfielder. You got a strong arm. You got this. He goes, they'll work with you on hitting. I wasn't a great hitter coming up through, but I was very good defensively and I had a strong arm. But you as that 15, 16-year-old kid, I know more than this adult, and I'm getting my way to the majors. I'm going to be a pitcher. I wrecked my arm because, and every time I talk to my illegitimate kid, I go, I did the same thing. I thought I knew what was right, but it's great seeing the kids that, like I said, that I was close to. They've all went on to become great fathers. They're very successful in business. Just, they're a credit to society. They just went on and, just became very, very special people. But, the biggest thing is they went on to be great fathers, great husbands. And like I said, very successful in business, and, very proud of those kids for that. They're just, you kind of like to think you had a little bit of a hand in it, but it was them that did it. But you kind of hope you helped a little bit.
You're making a difference in these kids' lives and inspiring them to really succeed in the world. It has to feel good knowing that you're making a positive contribution and being able to pay it forward to the next generation.
Yes. I mean, like you said, to see them to go on like I said, it's great that they're successful. The two special things though is seeing them be like great husbands and great fathers, just to see that.
What would you say in regards to giving back to the community gives you the most joy?
To see the kids that I got to be close with go on to be very successful. So that was, to see that just was, made it like well worth it that you got to be part of those kids' life. And still, even to today, you're still part of, maybe a small part of it, but you're still part of it.
Yeah. And so now, in addition to all this, I know off air, you've been telling me, through the diagnosis, you're also an advocate for people with MS. Talk to me about that.
Just like, because it's amazing to see how many people have gotten it. Like I have friends of mine that are getting diagnosed with it late in life, and they'll, talk to you and ask you for advice and stuff like that. So to try to help them out in any way I can. The problem is, like one of she's like a sister, because I'm very close with the family and stuff. And she got diagnosed like around 10 years ago or whatever, 11 years ago. So she's, early 60s, and she's dealt with it. So hers is a little, I guess where when I got diagnosed with it, I never did any of the research on it or anything. What I tried to do was keep a positive attitude and not think about it, but just go live every day like, this is your life. Live every day like you're supposed to. She has done some research on it and stuff, but we'll talk, and like I just try to put my opinion, my experience to help her out and stuff like that. And the same, like the people that I have dealt with that have had it, try to just tell them to stay positive and everything. Not to think about that you have it, and, stay positive. I think part of it's staying positive. If you can stay active and everything, I think that helps a lot. Where I think if you think about it, this maybe, to me, I don't know, like maybe the less you know, the better off you are, if that makes sense. Because you're not thinking about it. So I don't wake up in the morning going, oh, I have MS, that. I don't think about it. I hid it for a long time, just because, I didn't want anybody to know. But for me, I look at the accomplishments that I got, I wound up doing. Like I said, I went back, I played in men's leagues. I wound up, I'm trying to think, I'll probably screw it up. So whatever year that the major league wound up striking, they wound up having a tryout camp. So being here, the White Sox were training in Sarasota. So they held a tryout camp. I wound up going, it was an open invitation. I wound up making it all the way to the very end, where had I not, and I knew how tryout camps worked. You had to shine at everything you did. And the last time that I had, all I had to do was do this and shine, I would have been fine. I might have got to say, hey, I got to sit on the bench during a spring training game before the pros came back. You went to hit, and playing in the men's league, you used aluminum bats. Here, they gave you wooden bats, and it was a different weight distribution. And the first couple swings were off, and I knew it as soon as they moved on. But I was close. I almost close to say I got to sit on the bench during a spring training game. So, to say that you got to do that, you came that close. And then, in 98, I wound up going back into it, and we wound up, it was Bob Cook, Robbie Cook, and me went to an ECW show, and Bill Alfonso, we knew Bill. We were talking to him, and I started talking to Bill, and I asked him about how to get a tryout. And Bill looked at me, and I didn't get into it with him. He goes, we don't use jobbers. And I didn't say anything to him. I just kind of left it alone. I didn't want to start anything or make it like be conflicting or anything. I went to say, I'm not coming as a jobber. I want to see if you guys can do something with me, because I had been wrestling on the indies, and I got lucky. I couldn't find when I did that match and everything for the benefit for the school, I couldn't find somewhere to work out, and I knew I needed to work out in a ring because I had a lot of ring rust. Got a call in October to do an independent show, and wound up wrestling Chris Proctor. And I had known Chris because he had wrestled way back when I had wrestled. So we wound up wrestling, couldn't tell you the organization, but there were 3 guys there. And afterwards, we were in the locker room, and I got approached, and it wound up turning out to be Billy Lindsay. And Billy goes, you guys had the best match of the whole night. He goes, who you working for? I go, I'm just coming back. And he gave me his card, and he goes, I have a wrestling school in Tampa if you ever want to come work out or anything. And I was like, yes, I'm very interested. And so I wound up going to work out 2 nights a week with Bill and in his class. And that's where you kind of got that wrestling school. Now it was, okay, this is how a wrestling school is. And that, so the second time, And it was funny because now there were probably like 10 kids there or 10 people. And now you're nervous because you want to fit in and everything. So the first couple workouts were rough. And Billy's like, you got any tapes of you from WCW? I'm like, yes. And he goes, can you bring them? And I go, yeah. And so one of his trainers was Tim Wirtz, who was TNT Mahoney. Tim came up to me about the third practice and goes, I can tell you know what you're doing. You're just nervous. And he picked up on it. He goes, tell you what, you come up, can you get here an hour before we start class? And I go, yes, I'll make sure I'm here an hour before. He goes, cool, we'll start working. Me and you will work out before class. So I started going early and working out with Tim. And now I got comfortable and started realizing, okay, I was starting to fit in and got, personality wise and everything. And so Billy wound up making me one of his trainers afterwards, shortly after that, because everything started coming back. And Billy and Tim knew I wanted to go to ECW. So between the two of them, that they helped reinvent me. So they were teaching me stuff off the top ropes. They were teaching me how to do moonsaults. They were teaching me how to do stuff. So I reinvented myself. So I came back in 98. By 99, I had started reinventing myself and doing stuff off the top ropes and everything like that. So I reinvented myself to try to blend in with today's wrestling.
And here you are now going strong and have a match coming up.
Well, I don't know if we're going strong. We're kind of running on fumes there. So, but you look at it, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I look at it at this stage of the game. I'll be 65 in May, at the end of May. I've had 2 hip replacements. So I have both hips replaced, MS. And I'm like, how many people from that would go do this, And I go, definitely guys that are not the brightest bulbs in the box. So I'm not the brightest bulb in the box, but it's fun. It's, I'm one of the trainers at the organization I'm wrestling for is TWA. So they have a wrestling school, and it's awesome to pass on your knowledge to the people that are trying to, want to get into professional wrestling. So now you're training them, and you try to explain to them the philosophy and, how this business works and everything like that. So it's special to try to pass that on to people.
Yeah. And have you had anybody that has gone on to do anything with any of the big promotions?
No, at the time I started last year. So they had just started, Bob Cook was living with the guy from TWA, with Joe, who owns it. And then Bob wound up moving out and moving back. So he had moved away. So left him, they didn't have a trainer in Robbie's schedule. So Robbie was helping train, and Robbie's work schedule, he couldn't get there all the time. So Joe reached out to me and asked me if I would come and help. And so I did. So I have, there's 3 kids. A couple of the kids have done 116. So he's still, learning and stuff. And hopefully, he's 16. So we'll leave it at that, so he, hopefully everything will click in a couple years for him, but he's doing well, but still, he's still a kid. So it's still that learning phase, where the other kids are a little bit older. And the kid that is 16 also he didn't play sports. And so he doesn't have that athletic background. So that kind of, hurt a little bit, but he has done from day one to now, the kid has made, strides. He's, 100%. The other kids have played sports and stuff. So that has just helped them, where they have done some stuff on the indie circuit, which is kind of, cool, that you go, hey, I've kind of had a hand in that.
Yeah. It's excellent. You're passing it forward and passing on that knowledge that you were taught. And now you're helping the next generation find their way into the business. So that's amazing. Well, Robbie, I want to say thank you so much for coming on to Wrestling with Heart. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers that are watching this on YouTube. Where can people find out more about you on social media? And if there's anything you want to plug, feel free.
Okay. So if you want me on social media, on Facebook, you can find me. I go by my real name, so it's Robert Beauclair. You can find me. Hit me up there. If you go on Instagram, I go by Robbie Raw Dog Idol. So I do use my wrestling name on there. And then, or like my business, which you'll love the name of this, my business is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs Cleaning Enterprise. So you can look that up and that'll put you to my number. The things I guess that I would plug, I have wrote a book, and so my book is on Amazon Kindle. It's called Looking Up at the Lights, Robbie Idol, My Life in and Out of the Squared Circle. Plug the show on May 9th at 2:30 in the afternoon at the Twisted Fork down in Port Charlotte. So I'll be in a 6-man elimination match, bunkhouse brawl, to settle the score. So that, and then that's, if you need to get me, you can hit me on social media like that. The way that you spell Beauclair is totally different. So it's Boisclair. So that it doesn't sound like it's spelled.
All right. Well, thanks again, Robbie, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right,
I
take
greatly
care.
appreciate for having me on.
Of course. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.